folded my pain into laundry piles and grocery bags. It started with little things. A look, a comment, a pause in conversation that lasted just a second too long. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being foolish, that no decent woman would ever entertain those thoughts. But when someone sees you, really sees you, it's hard to pretend you don't feel it. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen. I was making tea. He leaned against the counter like he always did, but this time, his eyes didn't move. He looked straight at me, like he was waiting for something. Then he said it. Soft, careful. You ever wonder what it would be like to be with someone who sees you? I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. My hands shook. My heart raced. But I said nothing, and sometimes, silence is louder than words. That was the beginning. After that, everything changed. Every time he stopped by, the air felt different. Every time our hands brushed, my breath caught. I started waiting for him, without admitting it to myself. I wore lipstick again. I cleaned up before he came, pretending it was just coincidence. I told myself I was being silly, that I was still in control. But I wasn't. And then one night, he asked. A request I never expected. A moment so quiet, I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. And I said yes. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold if you believe some stories are too real to stay hidden. Because what happened next might change the way you see everything. I've been married for 12 years. At first, it was beautiful. We were young, full of plans, full of laughter. But somewhere along the line, the laughter faded. The plans turned into routines. And the man I used to stay up all night talking to started falling asleep with his phone in his hand. My husband became someone I barely recognized. He was always busy, always caught up in meetings, in projects, in things that never included me. Business trips came more often. Conversations grew shorter. Touches grew colder. I tried to hold us together. I tried everything. I made his favorite meals. Left notes in his luggage when he traveled. Wore perfume I knew he liked. But over time, he stopped noticing. And I stopped trying. Our home was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. A middle-class neighborhood where lawns were trimmed and neighbors waved. But inside, my heart was wilting. Every night we sat across from each other at the dinner table, and every night, I felt more alone. He never looked up anymore. Just scrolled through his phone, nodded at whatever I said, gave those half-smiles people give when they're not really listening. I became background noise in my own life. And then there was James, my husband's best friend since college. He was everything my husband used to be: funny, warm, magnetic. The kind of person who could walk into a room and light it up without trying. He used to visit often, especially when my husband was out of town. Said he didn't want me to feel alone. And at first, I believed him. He'd bring over takeout, fix little things around the house, ask about my day. And unlike my husband, he actually listened. He asked questions. He laughed at my jokes. He looked at me like I was still someone worth listening to. I didn't think much of it then. I just thought, maybe he was being kind. Maybe he was just a good friend. But kindness can be a dangerous thing when your heart is starving. When you've gone so long without affection, even the smallest bit of attention feels like a flood. I started noticing how he looked at me, how his voice softened when he spoke my name, how his hand lingered just a second longer than it should when he handed me something. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. And I noticed something else, too, something about myself. I started getting dressed a little differently before he came over. I started fixing my hair, applying a touch of lipstick. Just enough to feel seen. Not for my husband, he never noticed anymore, but for James. It made me feel guilty, and yet it made me feel alive. The nights were the hardest, lying in bed beside a man who never touched me anymore. A man who rolled away without a word. I would stare at the ceiling, wondering if this was what love became after time wore it down. I didn't want to betray anyone. I didn't wake up one day planning to cross a line, but I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of feeling like I didn't matter. James always had a way of filling the silence. What I didn't know was how dangerous that silence could become. It was a Saturday afternoon. Quiet. The kind of stillness that fills the air when the house is empty and no one's expected to be anywhere. My husband had left early that morning, another business trip, another excuse. 3 days this time. I didn't even walk him to the car. I just waved from the doorway. I had planned to spend the day cleaning, maybe folding laundry while some old movie played in the background. But a couple of hours in, the doorbell rang. It was James. He smiled like always, standing there with a small brown envelope in his hand. Said my husband had forgotten some files, and he figured he'd drop them off while he was in the area. I didn't think twice. I told him to come in. Offered him coffee. He said yes. We sat at the kitchen table. Same one where my husband and I hadn't shared a real conversation in months. James and I laughed about silly things, college stories, office gossip, even some old memory involving my husband locking himself out of a hotel room in nothing but a towel. It felt easy, familiar, safe. But then the mood shifted. I didn't notice it at first, but it was there. The way James's voice softened. The way his eyes held mine longer than they used to. He looked at me like he was studying something. Like he saw something no one else had taken the time to see. I got quiet. My fingers wrapped around my coffee mug, suddenly needing to hold something. That's when he said it. You look tired, you know that? Not physically. Just tired of not being seen. I smiled, but my heart was pounding. I didn't know what to say. He reached over and gently touched my wrist. Just for a second. Not forceful. Not demanding. Just there. Then he said it. You ever wonder what would happen if things were different between us? The words hung in the air like fog. Thick. Heavy. Impossible to ignore. My first instinct was to laugh. So I did. I let out this awkward, forced laugh, hoping it would break whatever strange current had just passed between us. James, come on, I said, trying to keep my tone light. You're being ridiculous. But I didn't move my hand. I didn't pull away. He didn't push. He didn't say another word. Just looked at me. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone saw straight through me. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a hairline fracture in glass that you don't see until it's too late. I told myself it was just a moment. Just a compliment. Just a man being kind. But deep down I knew. That was the first moment I stopped being safe. When James left that day, I stood at the door long after it had closed. My fingers still tingled where his hand had brushed mine. The silence in the house felt louder than usual. Almost suffocating. I went back to the kitchen, but everything felt different. The chair he sat in, the mug he held, even the air like it still held the echo of what he said. You ever wonder what would happen if things were different between us? That question stayed with me. It followed me into the laundry room, into the shower, into bed that night, where I stared at the ceiling beside a husband who didn't notice the way I flinched when he turned away. I felt shaken, but also alive. That was the terrifying part, because it had been so long since I'd felt anything other than numb. I kept asking myself, was he serious? Was it just a joke? Was he testing me? And worse, why did I care so much? But I knew it wasn't a joke. I saw it in his eyes. I felt it in my skin. There was nothing playful about the way he looked at me. And suddenly, everything started to shift inside me. The next morning, I spent extra time getting dressed, even though I had nowhere to go. I changed my top twice. Applied a little blush. Not because I had plans, but because I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. I started checking my phone more. Every time it buzzed, I wondered if it was him. And when it was just a simple text about some errand or a funny meme, I smiled longer than I should have. I told myself it was innocent. That I was just bored. just flattered. But deep down, I was waiting. Waiting for another look. Another touch. Another moment. James didn't push anything. He didn't bring it up again. But his presence, his energy, was different now. Every word felt loaded. Every silence, charged. The guilt came in waves. I'd catch myself staring at his name on my phone, heart racing, and then immediately feel disgusted with myself. I'd delete messages before my husband could see, even though they weren't inappropriate. Not yet. But they felt inappropriate in my heart. Because I knew why I was looking forward to them. I knew why I replayed our last conversation in my head, over and over. I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. The way my husband barely looked up when I walked in. The way he never asked me how I was doing anymore. The way he reached for the remote more than he reached for me. And I started wondering, had I always been this invisible? Or had I just gotten used to it? At dinner, I watched my husband chew in silence while scrolling his phone, and I imagined what James would say if he were sitting there instead. Would he ask about my day? Would he notice the new dress I bought? I hated myself for thinking that way. But it didn't stop the thoughts. It didn't stop the ache. I began walking around with two people in my head, one whispering, "This is wrong," and the other whispering, "This is what you deserve." I told myself it was harmless. That I'd never cross a line. That I was just soaking in the attention because I'd been dry for so long. But attention can be intoxicating. Especially when you've been starving. And what scared me the most was that I wasn't trying to stop. After that day in the kitchen, James started coming around more often. Never uninvited, never unannounced, but always when my husband wasn't home. He'd say he was dropping something off. Or just checking if I needed anything. Harmless reasons. Favors that, on the surface, made sense. He fixed a leaky tap. Replaced a bulb in the hallway. Carried a heavy box from the garage. Little things my husband used to do. Little things I had learned to stop asking for. But it was never really about the errands. The air between us had changed. It always felt heavier. Every time he walked through the door, something inside me tightened, like I was standing too close to a fire. Warm, dangerous, impossible to ignore. We kept it casual. We laughed, we talked, we pretended. But under every word, there was something unsaid. One afternoon, he stayed longer than usual. My husband was away again, some conference out of town. I had just finished making iced tea when James asked if we could sit outside for a bit. Said he needed to clear his head. We sat on the porch in silence at first, watching the trees sway. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. I nodded. I wasn't sure why my heart was beating so fast. He sighed, and for the first time, his voice lost that playful edge. "I know this is going to sound wrong, but I need to say it anyway. I've always seen you, even when he doesn't. And not just seen. I've noticed things he stopped noticing years ago." My throat tightened. I tried to respond, but nothing came out. He went on. "You're not invisible, you know. Not to me." He reached for my hand. Slowly, gently. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I should have, but I didn't. His fingers wrapped around mine, and the silence between us cracked wide open. I could feel the weight of everything he wasn't saying, and everything I didn't want to admit. I looked away, but he didn't let go. When I turned back, his eyes were on my lips. Not aggressively, not even expectantly. Just lingering. And again, I didn't stop him. I should have. I should have stood up. Walked inside. Reminded him who I was. Reminded myself who I was. But I stayed. I stayed in that moment, frozen between guilt and desire, drowning in the warmth of being seen. When he left that day, he didn't say goodbye the way he usually did. He just said, "I'll see you soon." And I felt that promise down to my bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. His words, his touch, the way he looked at me like I mattered. And then, just before midnight, my phone lit up. "Can I ask you something?" his message said. Something real. That night, he made a request that would change everything. James started showing up like clockwork. Always when my husband was away. Always with a reason. A loose hinge on the back door. A flickering hallway light. A small delivery my husband had forgotten. And always with that same smile, that same quiet energy that filled the space between us with something neither of us dared to name. We kept it safe. Or at least, we pretended to. Every conversation hovered on the edge of something more, and yet we danced around it like it didn't exist. But it did. And we both knew. There was this tension, a pressure building, quietly underneath every moment. It wasn't loud or obvious, it was the kind that settles deep inside you. That sits just beneath your skin, waiting for something to give. One afternoon, he knocked with no excuse. No package. No fix-it job. Just a simple, "Hey, you got a minute?" I nodded and stepped aside. He didn't say much at first. Just sat at the edge of the couch, rubbing his palms like he was trying to warm them. Then he looked up at me, eyes softer than usual. "Can we talk?" he said. I mean, really talk? I wasn't prepared. I don't think I could have been. We stepped outside. The sun was setting, casting that warm golden light across the porch. It should have felt peaceful. But my chest was tight. He took a deep breath, looked out at the trees, and said, "I've been alone for a long time, you know. Longer than most people would guess. Even in rooms full of people. I feel it." He wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't even looking at me when he said it. He was just letting it out. Then he turned. And when he looked at me this time, there was no mask. "I've always seen you," he said. Even when he doesn't. That was the moment. The moment I stopped pretending. My breath caught. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. And then, without asking, he reached out and took my hand. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. His hand was warm, steady, and mine didn't resist. He looked at me, not with hunger, not with lust, but with something quieter, deeper. Like he had been holding something in for too long. His gaze dropped to my lips, and I felt my heart slam against my ribs. I should have stepped back. I should have said something, anything, but I didn't. I just sat there, letting it happen, letting him see all the cracks I'd worked so hard to cover. In that moment, I felt more exposed than I ever had. Not because he touched me, but because I let him see the part of me I hid from everyone else. He didn't kiss me. He didn't try. But the space between us buzzed with the weight of everything we weren't saying. Eventually, he let go, stood up, ran a hand through his hair and muttered something about having to go. He didn't say goodbye. Just take care, okay? And then he was gone. But that wasn't the end. That night, when the house was dark and still, my phone lit up again. "Can I ask you something?" Something I've wanted to ask for a long time. That night, he made a request that would change everything. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the window, but it felt cold. The room, the sheets, my skin, everything felt colder. My phone was quiet. No message. No follow-up. Just silence. Later that afternoon, James came by. He said he forgot something the day before. He didn't look me in the eye. His voice was clipped, polite, like we were strangers again. We stood in the hallway, just a few feet apart, but it felt like a mile. The weight of what happened, what almost happened, sat thick between us. I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut in first. "Let's just forget it. It didn't happen." "Okay." I nodded before I could even think. What else could I say? But even as we stood there pretending, I knew something had shifted. A line had been crossed, even if no one spoke of it. And once that line disappears, you can't draw it back. After he left, the house felt different. My skin felt different. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't recognize what was staring back. A few hours later, my husband walked through the front door. Same suitcase. Same tired face. But something about him was off. He hugged me, but not like usual. His eyes stayed on me longer than they used to, like he was trying to read something behind my smile. Over dinner, he mentioned James. Casually. Then again. And again. Little things. Like asking if James had been around while he was gone. Asking if he'd helped out with anything. Harmless questions, but his tone was different. Like there was something underneath. Was it written on my face? Did he see it? Did he feel it in the air the way I did? Every time he looked at me, I felt exposed. Like he knew. Even if he didn't know what he knew, he sensed it. And James completely disappeared. No texts. No visits. No casual check-ins. It was like he vanished overnight. As if cutting contact could erase the memory of that moment. I told myself it was for the best. That it was good for things to go back to normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. I was trapped between a man who suddenly seemed to be watching me and a man who wouldn't even look at me. The house felt smaller. My breath felt shorter. I started checking over my shoulder every time I looked at my phone. I kept thinking, does he know? Did he guess? Was something said? The walls felt like they were closing in. And the silence, once filled with possibility, was now heavy with fear. I couldn't sleep. Nights became longer, heavier. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trapped in a storm of questions I didn't have answers to. Was I just weak? Or was I starving for something I thought I'd never taste again? I kept going back to that moment, his hand touching mine, the way he looked at me, the way I didn't pull away, the way I let it happen. I wanted to blame James. I wanted to say he crossed the line. But the truth is, I crossed it too. With my silence. With my stillness. With everything I didn't say. And yet, there was a part of me that didn't feel shame in the moment. There was a part of me that felt seen. Like someone had finally opened a door I'd been knocking on for years. I started wondering if that one moment of connection, of feeling alive, was worth the guilt that followed. Worth the quiet judgment I now carried around like a shadow. I watched my husband closely after he returned. Not just out of fear that he knew, but out of this strange hunger, hoping he'd see me the way James did. Hoping he'd finally notice the way I was shrinking. But nothing changed. He was still distant. Still half there. Still somewhere else, even when he was sitting right beside me. I kept remembering James' words, "I've always seen you." Even when he doesn't. And I started to wonder, had I really betrayed my husband? Or had he betrayed me first? Not with another woman. Not with lies. But with absence. With indifference. With letting me go unnoticed for so long, I forgot how it felt to be looked at like I mattered. Is it still betrayal if you're just trying to feel human again? I couldn't answer that. I still can't. I sat in that silence, alone. But this time, lonelier than before. Because now I knew what it felt like to be almost wanted, and then forgotten again. I was grieving something I never had the right to touch. And yet, a part of me still wanted to go back. Have you ever said yes? Not because you wanted to cause pain, not because you were reckless, but because you just wanted to feel chosen, even if only for a moment? Because that's what it was for me. It wasn't about lust. It wasn't even about love. It was about feeling like I mattered to someone. I keep asking myself, was I wrong? Was it weakness?